Hello and welcome to another edition of the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast. We are taking a look at the NFL offseason. We've already talked about some of the biggest signings, trades, and moves that some of these teams have made already here in parts 1 and parts 2. But there's been so much going down here this NFL offseason that we have to give you a part 3. And we're going to do that here in just a second. But before we do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel here, the Vipers Network, and check out the podcast on both Apple and Spotify. One of the busiest teams the last couple weeks here during the offseason has been the Buffalo Bills. They're going to come on this list here a couple times, but let's talk about the signing of Curtis Samuel and what it means for the Buffalo Bills. Samuel inks that 3-year deal worth $24 million, which could end up being $30 million when all is said and done. He also gets $15 million guaranteed, and there's reasons for that a little bit later. With the addition of Samuel, Buffalo, they don't necessarily have to grab a first-round receiver, but considering what they did here the other day, they probably should. There is also some familiarity there between Bills offensive coordinator Joe Brady and Curtis Samuel going back to their days in Carolina. With Brady as the offensive coordinator there in Carolina, Samuel, he would end up with 77 receptions on 97 targets for 851 yards while playing a role in the run game, carrying the ball on 41 occasions for 200 yards. So you know Samuel is going to get used a specific way here in this Joe Brady type offense. Now let's look at those numbers a little bit deeper where Samuel finished with a 79% catch rate there, lining up everywhere on the field from slot to outside and even in the backfield there. And he averaged a career high in yards per route run at 2.1 and yards after the catch with 348. Last season in Washington, the quarterback play was erratic at best as he finished with just 613 receiving yards on 62 receptions. But he did manage to see 91 targets, which was the 4th time in the last 5 seasons in which he has seen at least 90 targets in a single season. His targets per route run rate was the most on the team at 22.3%. His 18.3% target share, that ranks second. His explosive play rate, 16.3, and his yards per route run, 1.53. Samuel, he also brings an element to this offense that is needed in a bad way. I'm talking about his explosive speed, the ability to pick up yards after the catch, and a trusted target who has that versatility to have him create mismatches all over the field, which is a good thing because we saw what Khalil Shakir did last season, lining up in the slot 78% of the time. Now, I'm expecting Samuel, who's primarily been a slot receiver much of his career, to bounce around here to create those mismatches for Josh Allen, those mismatches that just weren't there last season, especially in the back half. Now, Samuel, he should be a solid flex option, which will positively affect Josh Allen's fantasy outlook as well, considering it did take a bit of a hit here in the last couple of days. This signing is a solid B. The Kansas City Chiefs, they added a deep threat in former Arizona Cardinal Marquise Hollywood Brown. Brown heads to Kansas City on a 1-year deal worth $11 million, money which had been previously going to Marquez Valdes-Scantling, which ironically is the only thing that Marquez Valdes-Scantling didn't drop when he was in Kansas City. Now, Kansas City, they had hoped that Marquez Valdes-Scantling could replace some of that need for speed, that deep speed in this Chiefs offense when they traded away Tyreek Hill. That did not happen. I mean, speed is great, but you have to catch the ball, man. Hollywood Brown, he's not Tyreek Hill either, but he will certainly give defensive coordinators fits there when they try to game plan around his ability to stretch the field. Defenses, they will have to make sure they have a man back there all the time, which will greatly benefit Travis Kelce should we see a resurgence in him this season, and should free up second-year wide receiver Rashee Rice if he can find himself getting free. More on that here in a second. Brown, he's also more than just a speed guy. If you look at his reception perception profile, courtesy of Matt Harmon, you will notice that he has been making a living there on those intermediate in-breaking routes and has been productive versus zone coverage throughout his career. However, Brown is now a couple seasons removed from that 1,000-yard campaign back in 2021. And then again, his time in the desert with Kyler Murray, it was kind of erratic there. Between him and Kyler Murray, one of them was always hampered with some kind of injury. For me personally, I look at this, he was on the injury report more than he was on the field when I talk about Marquise Hollywood Brown. We're talking about severe hamstring injuries, a heel, a foot, you name it. Brown suffered it during his time in Arizona. We saw a glimpse of what he is capable of doing in those first 6 weeks of that 2022 season when both Murray and Brown were healthy. That is when Brown was a top 5 fantasy wide receiver, and he was on pace for more than 1,300 yards and 120 receptions. The truth is, this will be the first time that we've seen Brown in what we call a pass-first type offense. In Baltimore, he played under Greg Roman, where wide receivers go to die. A team that threw the ball just 51% of the time. That was 29th in the league. In Arizona, the Cardinals, they passed just 54% of the time, which was in the middle of the pack. Now, the Chiefs, they have led the league in pass rate in each of the last 5 seasons, passing at least 64% in each of those years. Now, right there in itself means that we're going to see an uptick in Marquise Brown's fantasy value. And as a fantasy manager, I'm using this signing right now as a sell now opening. His value will never be higher than it is right now. And the 26-year-old, hey, you could buy him too if the price is right. Now, why was that Hollywood Brown a big signing? Well, considering what we've seen in recent days here with Rashee Rice and the legal issues that he could be facing, again, we do not have all the information present to us right now. Things can change in a hurry. And remember, you're innocent until proven guilty. We're going to call upon our good friend Drew Davenport there at Drew Davenport FF on the X machine there to kind of give us a quick little breakdown of what's been happening in regards to Rashee Rice and what's going on. So what do we know right now? Again, this is dating back to April 1st and what Drew said. So I'm going to be quoting him throughout this little talk about Rashee Rice. We only know a few things for certain. 2 vehicles were driving at a high speed on a Dallas freeway there, and 1 vehicle lost control, causing a 6-car accident in which multiple people were injured and some were sent to the hospital. And these vehicles, they are connected to Rashee Rice in some way, shape, or way. I mean, he's got the registration or whatever that might be. After that, we unfortunately are getting into a lot of rumors here and conjecture. When the stakes are this high, I'm not super comfortable with that. So I'm going to say right now that there are a lot of this is based on running scenarios in his head and from his experience. Again, he's just talking about his experience here and what it could possibly be, not 100%. What are the stakes? Texas section 550.021 says that leaving the scene of an accident can be charged as a misdemeanor if it involves property or unattended vehicle, but it is a felony if an injured person is involved, and that appears to be the case here with Rashee Rice. The code gives a range of outcomes here and charges based on the severity of injuries, death, serious injury, or injury. None of those seem to be factoring in here as of right now. Those are considered felony level charges. We can narrow this down to a range here and say death isn't involved, but we don't know as of yet the severity of the injuries otherwise. If it isn't too bad, then the charge can carry up to 1 year local incarceration for the lowest tier of felonies. If the injury is serious, then this bumps it up a level. Keep in mind, that is the charge can be attached to another charge. Therein lies the key place here when we're talking about what should be part of the analysis of this case. Whenever I see a hit skip cases, they are often accompanied by suspicion of additional illegal behavior. It can be something as insidious there as a suspended license, unpaid fine, or as bad as a DUI, possession of drugs, firearms, or even vehicular manslaughter there. But keep in mind that people are people and they can do things for none of these reasons. I mean, you can get scared and take off there. I mean, that is in the realm of possibilities of what Drew is trying to say. Realizing that in this case, if the reports are true and there are 2 drivers traveling at a dangerous speed and cause an accident, it is still a distinct possibility they simply were like, oh crap, what do we do now? And just take off. That happens. There are possible rumors out there that some of these guys left with a bag full of stuff and possibly firearms. If you watch the video, a woman does make a suggestion that there were firearms involved. Again, this is just hearsay. There's nothing been proven as of yet. These kind of rumors, they carry serious allegations that need to be checked out, but the reliability of that kind of thing is quite low here. Try not to listen to all these other things out here from unreliable sources. So what are the chances that this becomes a big deal for Rice? In Drew Davenport's educated guess, it is not likely to end up with a serious consequence for him. Why not? Let's break it down from a few different angles. These cases are notoriously difficult to prosecute because the main element to prove is to place the person behind the wheel, which we cannot do with Rashee Rice as of yet. The elements of this case are that what the prosecutor needs to win in this case. They have to prove what happened in the court's jurisdiction by the defendant, and each part of the crime happened as well. As we can see here right now, none of this stuff can be proven that Rashee Rice was the one driving, the one responsible for the accident. So right now, Rashee Rice is probably going to get off okay from the legal standpoint, but he could still be suspended for a game or 2 by the NFL. From one wide receiver to another, let's talk about Keenan Allen being traded from the Los Angeles Chargers to the Chicago Bears. Now, we know what included this deal. It was just a 4th-round pick going to the Chargers, who were basically in cap hell. Let's call it the way it is. We've seen Mike Williams go. We saw Joey Bosa and Killimack have to restructure. Management also approached Keenan Allen. He's like, no thanks. I'm okay. I'm not taking no pay cut here. Which, you know what? That's okay for Keenan Allen. I mean, why would you take a pay cut? A team offered you to pay you money. Why would you take that pay cut? Especially when you've been as productive as Keenan Allen has, and he hasn't even seen a dip in his production. So even after restructuring Bosa, Mack, and releasing Mike Williams, the cap was going to remain a problem for this Chargers team, as they were roughly $25 million over before those moves. And come Sunday, the Chargers, they were on the hook for all this $5 million more from roster bonuses. So they had to make that move to move Keenan Allen to save a few more bucks. Chicago, adding Allen, that is great for their draft. They are now in a position which they can go out there and grab the best player available. Hey, heck, it could be another wide receiver for all we know. It could be an edge defender. It could be another wide receiver. That means offensive tackle, defensive end, wide receiver. These are all strong possibilities come April. It also gives whoever is under center not one, but two reliable targets to help build their confidence should Allen leave in free agency next season. Chicago may even, if Allen walks, Chicago may get a third-round comp pick here after only giving him a fourth-round pick to acquire him. Now, Allen, let's talk about how good he's been since he's been in this league. Going back to 2013, where he was a rookie, he caught 71 passes that season for 1,046 yards. Fast forward 12 years later, and guess what? He's still doing it. 10,530 career receiving yards. He is vacating 1,309 targets and brings to him Chicago more than 900 receptions and 59 touchdowns. In 5 of Allen's last 7 seasons, he has finished with at least 1,000 yards, and in 2 of those seasons, he fell short of those milestones by missing several contests. So there is that aspect to it as well. Now, from fantasy purposes, we know that the Bears run a lot of 12 personnel under Shane Waldron, so we know that could have a little bit of effect on Allen. So for Allen, this is a slight downgrade as far as fantasies go. He's going from a pass-first offense in sunny California to a team that's still going to run the ball, and they play in much colder weather there in Chicago. He's also going from a Pro Bowl quarterback there in Justin Herbert to a rookie under center here, more than likely Caleb Williams here, so that could have an effect one way or the other. For the Bears, this trade, it's an A- for them. I see this as a B for Keenan Allen with Waldron here as an offensive coordinator. DJ Moore, think of this team here right now as what Waldron had there in Seattle with DJ Moore playing the role of DK Metcalf. Keenan Allen, who plays more of the slot, he's more of that Tyler Lockett kind of guy. So that's kind of the expectation that you can have, where 1,000 yards is still definitely a possibility for Allen this season. And speaking of the Seattle Seahawks, Geno Smith, he's been put on notice at the Seahawks. They traded for another quarterback there in Sam Howell. The details are as followed. Seattle, they received Howell, a 4th-round pick. That's pick number 102, and a 6th-round pick, 179. Going the other way, the Commanders, they're also going to receive a 3rd-round pick, number 78, and a 5th-round pick there, 152. That's it for a young quarterback who threw 21 touchdowns. I mean, he did throw 21 interceptions as well, but he also threw 3,946 yards. Smith, he saw his numbers drop last season. Maybe that's because Dave Canales, he left and he went to Tampa Bay, who's now in Carolina, but his completion percentage, it went from 69.8% down to 64.7%. His passing yards, they also dropped from 4,282 to 3,626. His touchdowns, they went down from 30 in 2022 to just 20 in 2023. Perhaps that is the Dave Canales effect. So that could come into play again here this season. And perhaps Sam Howell could be the guy under center halfway through. Who knows? Seattle, they may have felt that they're too far down on the draft board to select a difference maker at the quarterback position this season. After all, Geno Smith is 33 years of age, and he did show signs of regression last season, as we just talked about there. So here, it's important for Seattle. They are getting a young quarterback in the building. Howell, he's 23 years old. He's the same age as Jaden Daniels, and he's actually younger than the rookies here that we're talking about in Bo Nix and Michael Penix. In his second season, his first season as a starter, Howell completed 63.4% of his passes. I talked about those 3,946 yards in that Eric Bieniemy offense that looked inadequate at times. I mean, it wasn't a great-looking offense. He also had some turnover issues there. We talked about those 21 interceptions, but he also had those touchdowns there that matched that, and he converted 5 more scores on the ground with his rushing ability and finished as a QB 11 as far as fantasy is concerned. For the Seattle Seahawks, this is a B-plus move looking towards their future. They gave up nothing, and now they have a young quarterback who could be a starter as early as halfway through the season, but he has proven that he's had success in this league. I'm looking at this more of a dynasty move for Howell, so I'm going to give it a B because the thought of him with DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith-Njigba as his potential targets as early as week number 8 and a running game with two talented runners there in Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, that's exciting. Another disappointing quarterback that went on the move this season was the Falcons, adding some firepower, grabbing Rondale Moore from the Arizona Cardinals for Desmond Ridder, who simply hasn't panned out in Atlanta. We rarely see one of those player-for-player type deals in this day and age here. For Ridder, it is a fresh start. As the Falcons, we know they went out there, they signed Kirk Cousins, so Ridder was not going to get any snaps anytime soon. And, I mean, sure, Kyler Murray's there in Arizona, but, hey, Kyler Murray's been hurt a time or two. So I'm not going to put a lot of tension here on the Desmond Ridder part of this trade because it's Desmond Ridder and really has no fantasy implications. Now, the fantasy implications for the Arizona Cardinals, with the movement of Rondale Moore, what we've seen from this Cardinals team, they're going to need to get themselves a wide receiver in this draft, possibly as early as the 4th overall pick. Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, they have to get one of these guys. They've got some other holes that they need to fill, and they could also trade back. So lots of different things for the Arizona Cardinals here to worry about. But you look at this team, Trey McBride, he's already on pace to catch 100 balls, and we aren't even at the draft yet. I mean, that's where Trey McBride's value is. It's like to the moon here. Marvin Harrison, if he ended up on this Cardinals team, he'd already be guaranteed 130 targets before stepping foot on rookie camp there. Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, Zach Pascal, come on, man. Those aren't the answers. That ain't going to get you nothing in the passing game. Now, Rondale Moore, he's the real fantasy deal in this move because Atlanta, they are revamping this offense. Cousins is a big deal, people, when he brings instant credibility to this Falcons team, to Drake London, to Kyle Pitts, and their fantasy outlooks. Bijan Robinson, we know he's in line for another huge, successful season here. And as far as I'm concerned, the Falcons, they added themselves a true number 2 there in Darnell Mooney. Back in September last season, the 2 top receivers behind Drake London were Mac Hollins and Cardell Hodge, with Van Jefferson eventually being traded to Atlanta later on in the season. Essentially, Moore has been a gadget player for the Cardinals, catching 135 passes, 1,200 yards, adding 250 on the ground on 52 carries during his 39 career contests. However, I'm old enough to remember Moore's freshman season at Purdue, where he would go on to catch 114 passes for 1,258 yards and 12 touchdowns in just 13 games. So the talent, it is certainly there when we're talking about Rondale Moore. It just needs an opportunity, considering he possesses game-changing athleticism. This is a huge deal for the Atlanta Falcons. Last season, Falcons pass catchers, they averaged just 3.7 yards after the catch per reception, according to those next-gen stats. Moore averaged the 5th most yards after the catch in 2022. Among wide receivers, they're averaging 6.4 yards per reception. Atlanta, they've added playmakers all over in this offense, so this move makes this team better. For fantasy, Moore remains nothing more than a late-round flyer who could be a potential game breaker later on in the season in this Falcons offense, because they like to run a little bit of motion here, and that is one of those kind of guys where Moore is going to find his success is by running in motion, getting some touches manufactured for him, toss sweeps, screen passes. Suddenly, Moore has some flat value there as a potential flex option. Maybe not in the first few weeks, but as the season goes on and on. And considering the cost was Desmond Ridder, this is a solid B for everyone involved. Another player that was traded here recently was Justin Fields, as he is a Bear no more, which really shouldn't surprise a whole lot of people out there. Chicago traded the former first-round selection to the Pittsburgh Steelers in exchange for a conditional 6th-round pick in 2025 that could be a 4th-round pick, depending on how things go. The compensation alone tells us what basically the league and how they viewed Justin Fields after a couple seasons in Chicago. Now, there were some rumored teams to be additionally asking about Fields. However, it sounds like Fields' preference was the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Bears did right by him to make this move work. Now, I think Pittsburgh has something on Ryan Poles, because remember this whole Chase Claypool thing? They have a little bit of, Ryan Poles' kryptonite could very well be the Pittsburgh Steelers. Chicago, they are now all but certain to select a quarterback at number 1, and that looks like it's going to be Caleb Williams because they've been whining and dining him pretty much every day here in the last couple weeks. What is going to happen here is they're going to get the franchise quarterback, and they're going to do something that they never did with Justin Fields, and they are going out there and they're supporting him with the pieces that they're adding in there. Poles went out there, he added to his defense along with DeAndre Swift, Keenan Allen, who are going to be major players in this Bears offense. Chicago, they also still own that 9th overall selection, and way they've done this, I mean, we talk about edge and offensive tackle as possibilities, but Rome Odunze, he's still a possibility there at pick number 9 for this Bears offense. Could you imagine this Bears offense with Caleb Williams there under center, and you go out there, you got yourself DJ Moore, you got Keenan Allen, you got Rome Odunze. I mean, this could be a scary offense. It's already looking pretty darn good. This could put them over the top. Along with Fields, the Steelers, they acquire his 2024 salary, which is $3.23 million guaranteed, along with a fifth-year option that could be worth $25.6 million. Now, what the league has told us about Fields here in those recent weeks is that the Steelers are more likely to decline that, but they can still end up re-signing him at a more manageable cap hit at the season's end. Fields has already been told that Russell Wilson is going to be the starter heading into next season. So if you believe coach speak there, then there is no competition for the position at this time, which on the surface, considering Wilson's 2023 campaign, seems a little bit suspicious. Per Next Gen Stats, Justin Fields threw 9 touchdowns while under pressure last season, just 2 fewer than now Steelers teammate Russell Wilson. Steelers quarterbacks last season threw just 3 such touchdowns while under pressure in 2023. That was tied for 23rd in the league. So you see where the Steelers kind of addressed a serious need at the quarterback position. Fields has a 60.3 completion percentage, 6,674 passing yards, 40 touchdowns, 30 interceptions, and that huge 2,220 rushing yards to go along with 14 career rushing touchdowns. Unfortunately, Fields basically put himself in a tough position. He's a top 12 fantasy quarterback thanks to his ability to produce godly fantasy numbers with his running ability. Fantasy success, however, does not necessarily equate to success in the NFL or how teams view success. Pittsburgh has to hope that Fields can push Wilson and Wilson can push Fields. And at the end of the season, the Steelers will have a difficult decision on who their franchise quarterback is going to be. Worst case scenario, hey, no matter who they choose, it's going to be an upgrade on Kenny Pickett versus Mason Rudolph discussions that they had before this season's free agency period even opened. Now, back on March 9th, the Denver Broncos, they dealt wide receiver Jerry Jeudy to the Cleveland Browns for a 5th and 6th round pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. For the last couple seasons, Jeudy's name has been in the rumor mill, so this trade should not come as a surprise to anybody. Denver, they must have heard what Steve Smith said on national television and is cleaning their house, removing any potential distractions as this team goes through a rebuild. It also means that Tim Patrick should be on your fantasy radars, as too Marvin Mims, who has nice sleeper value deeper in drafts. Mims, he had just 7 receptions and 5 kickoff returns last season with his limited touches, but he still produced 8 of the top 10 offensive gains for this Broncos team. So expect Mims to be used a little bit more of the slot, in which he averaged 2.64 yards per route run and ran more than just go routes. So, hey, we know Mims, he's a good ball player there. Expect a little bit more of him here in year number 2. Now, if you look at ESPN's open scores, which suggests how open a player is getting time and time again over the last 3 seasons, Jeudy has finished 60th, 80th, and 79th. That's not getting open, man. That means like my old man body here could probably cover Jerry. Well, no, it couldn't. Let's call it the way it is. There's no way I'm covering Jerry Jeudy, but I can still talk about how everyone else can cover Jerry Jeudy. Again, all the distractions, none of the production. That was too much for this Broncos team. As for the Browns, their 3rd and 4th options at wide receiver are Cedric Tillman and David Bell. And Cleveland views themselves as real Super Bowl contenders and are willing to take a risk on a player to come to them as their 3rd or 4th option there behind Amari Cooper, David Njoku, and most likely Elijah Moore as far as the passing game is concerned. As for fantasy output, don't expect Jerry Jeudy to be much more than a solid wide receiver 4, maybe a flex option during those bye weeks. If he outproduces expectations, great. However, that has never been the case. There's nothing right now to lead us to believe that his production will match what the promise once was. Even with all these players on this Browns roster who can catch the ball, Cleveland still ran the ball 518 times last season, which was the 4th most in the NFL. And guess what? Nick Chubb, he didn't even play a majority last season there. Over the last 4 seasons, the Browns' pass play rate ranks 28th at 56.5%. So there's plenty of competition and very few targets in this passing game. Cleveland will have some time with Jerry Jeudy as they sign the maligned wide receiver to a 3-year contract extension worth $58 million with $41 million guaranteed, which just has me shaking my head and thinking, I am in the wrong business right now. Anyway, I digress. Now, after making a big splash with the signing of Christian Wilkins, the Las Vegas Raiders added to their backfield after the loss of Josh Jacobs by signing former Minnesota Viking Alexander Mattison. This is nothing more than a depth move. So let's get that out of the way right now. Mattison, he was not the answer for the Minnesota Vikings once they moved on from Dalvin Cook. He's not going to be the replacement for Josh Jacobs. He's simply another body behind Zamir White. Somehow Mattison wound up with negative yardage there and no touchdowns when given an opportunity, 9 opportunities actually, from the 5-yard line and in last season. That should tell you all you need to know about the threat that he poses to Zamir White's fantasy outlook. Now, it isn't all bad for Mattison, as he did provide the Vikings with some value over his 5-year career. In 5 seasons, Mattison averaged 4.1 yards per carry and accumulated 2,367 yards on the ground, while adding another 717 yards on 100 receptions. The 25-year-old also finished with 17 touchdowns during his tenure with the Vikings. In 2019 and 2020, Mattison would average 4.5 yards per carry while averaging 98 yards per season. And he was more of that change of pace back there for Dalvin Cook. And that's when he was the most effective. So I see that as his role, the one he's going to be sliding into when he comes to Las Vegas. For fantasy, it's more about Zamir White. From weeks 15 through 18, White would average 23.3 touches and churn out an average of 114.3 total yards per game. That production led to RB12 when looking at the fantasy points per game over that stretch. White's production at the season end is probably why Josh Jacobs was made expendable. White, throughout that stretch, he was 6th in yards after contact per attempt, 13th in explosive run rate, 17th in success rate. If anything, you may see a dip in White's ADP with the Mattison signing, which means he's going to be a value. And if you're looking for RB2 to get on your fantasy rosters, White's one of those guys to be going after. All right, let's close off this show with a couple wide receivers. Now, after becoming that cap casualty there in Los Angeles, Mike Williams himself found himself getting him a 1-year deal worth up to $15 million with the New York Jets. That's right, Jets. They have another wide receiver. Williams, who's coming off an ACL injury, will now play opposite of Garrett Wilson, giving Aaron Rodgers another weapon in this Jets offense. Williams was a sought-after free agent who was scheduled to meet with the Steelers and the Panthers prior to signing with the Jets. Like, hey, no, we're not letting you out of this building. Williams has long been the poster child for injury prone. Whether you like that term or not, that's basically what Mike Williams has been. With the Chargers being so tight against the cap, and the fact that Williams has missed 18 games over the last 2 seasons, you can see why the Chargers felt they weren't getting a solid return on their investment there when it comes to Mike Williams. In 7 seasons with Los Angeles, Williams has played a full season just once, and that was back in 2018. In 88 career games over those 7 seasons, Williams has recorded 309 receptions for 4,806 yards and 31 touchdowns, averaging 15.6 yards per reception. One thing you cannot take away from Williams is that he has been a deep threat anytime that he's been on the field. Perhaps one of the best when it comes to contested catches. His 15.6 yards per reception is amongst the best dating back to any receivers going back to 2018. When healthy, Williams, he's going to be an excellent complement to Wilson, 6'4", 218 pounds. He could be Rodgers' favorite target when this Jets team gets down in the red zone. Back in 2022, when looking at ESPN's open metric, Williams was 25th among 130 wideouts there, averaging 2.3 yards per route run, a 1.6% drop rate. That's just one drop, while posting a 57.7 contested catch rate. That was 5th amongst wide receivers. Williams' lowest contested catch rate in his entire career was 48.5%, people. That means that ball goes up, it's probably going to be Mike Williams. Now, prior to tearing his ACL, Williams, he was off to a hot start in 2023. 19 catches, 249 yards in just 3 games. But being 30 years old and coming off a torn ACL will always make you a serious boom-bust type candidate there. And when we look at Williams for fantasy, and in this Jets offense, it's reasonable to project somewhere in that 65 catch, 900 yard, 5 touchdown with upside to get as many as 10 touchdowns, which would make him in that wide receiver 34 range based on last season's numbers. And he could possibly be as high as wide receiver 20 if he can reach his upside. As for his floor, Mike Williams playing on turf at MetLife Stadium, that cannot be good for his longevity and could equate to another lost season. As much as this move helps Williams prove his value and potentially earning another payday next season, it helps Garrett, who teams will no longer be able to double team him constantly. I mean, look, Williams, you can say what you want about Williams, but he's definitely an upgrade on Allen Lazard and Xavier Gibson. I mean, seriously, really? And finally, perhaps the biggest news from the last week here, the Houston Texans are back at it. After going out there and trading for Joe Mixon, they went out there and traded for Stefon Diggs. Yes, that's right. Diggs is heading to Texas, and we're not talking about Dallas, as the Bills traded the 31-year-old Pro Bowl wide receiver to the Houston Texans for a 2025 second round selection via the Minnesota Vikings. Houston, they're ended up getting a 5th and a 6th round pick in the 2024 and 2025 drafts. Diggs is coming off of 6 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons and is just 5 yards shy of 10,000 for his career. For the Bills, we know they went out there and they signed themselves Curtis Samuel, but they did let Gabe Davis go as well. So this means they could end up drafting a wide receiver in the first round. They're definitely going to be drafting a wide receiver at some point in this year's draft. They may have to pay up to get that, depending on what they want to do. So, for example, expect them to make a play for Brian Thomas Jr., who could drop in that 22 range, which means they don't have to go so far up. Or potentially, they could take all this draft capital that they've accumulated here, and they could really make a push to get in the conversation for Rome Odunze. I don't know if the Bills can get up there, but it wouldn't surprise me if they made that move. Obviously, this is going to help with the fantasy projections for Dalton Kincaid, who should be considered a top 5 fantasy tight end moving forward. Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, they also get a little bit of a bump there as well. Perhaps the Bills have something even bigger in the works. I mean, their cap makes it very difficult, but a move like this could make me they're kind of in on maybe a T. Higgins or Brandon Ayuk. I mean, crazier things have happened. As big of a loss as Diggs was for this Bills team, it's not like he was productive after Joe Brady took over. Take into account in those final 7 contests, Diggs failed to record more than 8 receptions or 90 receiving yards in any of those games. Looking at his splits weeks 1 through 10, the Bills, they went 5-5 there, with Diggs averaging nearly 87 yards per game and 7 touchdowns. Meanwhile, the back end of the season, the Bills would go 6-1, with Diggs averaging just 45 yards per game and a touchdown over that stretch. Now, if you take a look at that split a little bit further, over that period, Kincaid saw his first read target share increase by 10%, people, and his yards per route run, that went from 1.43 to 1.7, courtesy of Fantasy Points Data Suite. Now, what is more concerning for the Bills is that they signed Diggs to a huge contract extension not that long ago and will now carry a dead cap hit of over $30 million. You must really hate a guy to be willing to pay them $31 million to not play for you. That's literally more than they're paying Josh Allen to be their franchise quarterback right now. As for the Texans, the Avengers assemble. They are assembling an all-Madden team there down in Houston. C.J. Stroud, Stefon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, Joe Mixon. This Texans offense is scary on paper. Needless to say, expectations are at an all-time high for this Texans franchise. Can Stefon Diggs remain happy in an offense that is sure to spread the ball around? It will be interesting to see this dynamic between he and Stroud if Diggs isn't getting his accustomed 8 to 10 targets per game. This trade certainly doesn't do any favors for Collins or Dell, as their target share and volume is going to be taking a little bit of a hit. But hey, their efficiency, we should see a bit of an uptick in that, which means I got Nico Collins as a wide receiver 2 and Tank Dell as a flex option. When we look at the winners and losers of this trade, the winners are C.J. Stroud because, look, he's getting himself another target. He's got 3 solid wide receivers, a solid tight end, a solid running back. He could be the first quarterback coming off the boards in fantasy drafts. Dalton Kincaid, we saw what the splits look in the back half of the season. That means more targets funneled towards him. And Curtis Samuel got a lot of money guaranteed. He is the number 1 target right now there in Buffalo until they do something in the draft. The losers, Josh Allen. He loses one of his most reliable targets. Josh Allen struggled until the Bills made that trade to bring Diggs over from Minnesota. Nico Collins, his value takes a hit. Tank Dell, his value takes a hit. And yes, Stefon Diggs' value takes a hit. I mean, it took a hit at the back end of the season last year, but there's too many mouths to feed in Houston for this to work. With that being said, make sure to tune into our next episode of the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast and check out our Behind the Grind, where we've already featured Pat Mato and Dalton Del Don. We'll see you next time.